So the second Sunday of the month, we share our journey, and I asked Dr. Dave Fisher to share today. So welcome, Dave.
Thank you.
We're going to sit down and talk, and Dave wanted to make sure that I knew he'd like to ask me a question. So we're going to have a conversation more than an interview here. And I guess what I'd like to start with everyone here is I'd just like to let you know that Dave is one of those guys that just is kind of the glue that holds everything together in the background, and we don't always see him, but we get to see him today. And he contributes so much to our congregation that I thought we need to hear more from him as we go along. So tell us about you, where you came from, your family, born and raised, and
Is this working? Hear me? Perfect. Well, I sort of thought it was rather auspicious that I would be talking on Palm Sunday, but this place has meant a lot to me over the years. And actually Palm Sunday, with the anticipation and the message that it brings, is also, I think, somewhat apropos to what we'll be talking about. But to answer the question, I come from pretty traditional roots. I think a couple of interesting issues that helped form me was that I lost my father when I was 3 years old. He was killed in an accident. And so that meant that my mother, who took care of four of us, all of us less than 7 years old at the time, needed some help. And so she would take us to Minnesota every year while she completed her master's degree, because now she was going to be the breadwinner. And she used to leave us at our grandparents' house. And we had two grandparents, both on farms. And so I grew up swimming in lakes and driving tractors. And although, you know, people say it's tragic to lose your father at age 3, honestly, my life would have been different, and I don't know any better, but certainly I wouldn't be the same person I am. But a couple of the things, or a lot of the things that molded me were really foundational back then. I can always remember my grandparents saying, "Make yourself useful," right? Make yourself useful. And, you know, the idea of developing skills and serving and being useful was foundational for me. My mom was going to get her master's degree. Education was instilled in me as something very important. And actually, we lived in a natural environment there as well. So being outdoors all the time was also, I think, something that has really been important for me. And there was a lot of, you know, we were a Norwegian, Scandinavian sort of a family. Unlike my wife, who comes from an Italian background, we were much more quiet, understated, and and the expectations were all there about what you needed to do and expected to do. And in fact, one of the things that I was going to challenge Jeff on a little bit was his parable about the talents that he gave about, I don't know, a month and a half ago. But the idea that when you have something, that you're expected to use it. And if you have more, then more is expected of you. And that parable, in Jeff's retelling, was indicative more that the master who had the talents really wasn't God, the creator, or it was the people of the time. But in fact, where I came from, the expectation was that if you had talents, you needed to use them. And it wasn't sort of a punishment if you didn't. It was more that that's the way things were, and that's how you would be happiest. And so that's the way I grew up. And after high school, I journeyed a little bit further, and I can talk a little bit about that as well. But that's pretty much my foundation, and pretty much traditional. And at that time, my faith as well was fairly concrete. I thought, you know, of God as a person. I thought of the church. My one set of grandparents was the church in the little town they lived in. My grandmother played the piano. She sang in the choir. My grandfather taught church, Sunday school. So it was pretty much, and my mom was a Christian education director. So it was all very, very strongly instilled in me. But my own faith at that time was much more concrete and I think conversational prayers were conversations with God, and I think that really was something that I still think about a lot when I'm around kids and folks who are in my own work talking to people. Everybody comes across in a different way, and understanding those sorts of nuances can be very helpful.
So, becoming useful and becoming a doctor. How did you decide to become a doctor? Maybe you can share, your specialty or background there, and then your motivations to study medicine.
Well, I was very interested in sciences, and actually I went to college to become a physicist. And then by the second year, it was engineering and engineering physics. And then my brother, who's probably one of the most special people in my life, he's the one who grew up with me in Minnesota. And he was the guy who would get me to do all sorts of wild stunts, including climbing trees and falling out of them and doing, and stringing ropes from the top of the barn all the way to the bottom and swinging on this little pulley all the way down. Only he was a lot lighter than me, and so I was the one who hit the stall coming down. But anyway, he was very bright and early on in engineering, so I sort of followed his lead and did some of that in college. But about the middle of college, I got involved with a food bank, and it became clear that using technology and using science, as well as the human factor, really struck me. One of the other foundational experiences I had in college was reading a book by E.F. Schumacher. And E.F. Schumacher was an economist. And the book was called Small is Beautiful, and the subtitle was Economics as If People Matter. And the whole idea was that you should try to find meaningful work, and we as a society should create meaningful work. And the whole idea that people need to develop themselves and also to find and create meaning. And I think the other important thing in college was that's where I met Sue. And even though we played cat and mouse for 15 years before we actually got together, those relationships and the development of that, and I also was active in the local campus ministry in the Methodist Church, and those relationships really also formed me. But at that point in my life, my ideas about God and about people became much less fixed and much more nebulous. And I think it was a good thing, and is a good thing, because there's even more of a miraculous take in life if you look at things as, as full of wonder. And when you find out how the human body works, I'm a rheumatologist, I deal with immunologic diseases. When you learn about how the immune system works, when you learn about how it interacts with hearts and lungs and the medicines, and it's just endless, and it's so fascinating. I mean, I listen, and not just in rheumatology, but the New England Journal of Medicine is full of amazing things that are happening all the time. And in college, I really got the idea that what we have is not a fixed pie. Technology and science can keep making things better, and even though the world around us is full of troubles, if you look back 100 years about how people had to live and the kinds of progress we've made, I mean, things like clean water, vaccinations, sanitation, I mean, all sorts of simple things, and the way that we can create food. In high school, we had a college professor come and talk to us and talked about the end of oil, because he drew a line on a graph and said, if we keep using oil like this, by the year 1990, whatever it was going to be, we're going to run out of oil. But it's clear that with technology, you can use things differently, you can use things more wisely, and obviously that's where we're stuck now in terms of where our world is. But the whole idea that there isn't a fixed pie, that with science and technology you can make more and be more, and I think that I think that it's important to consider that aspect as foundational, because we need to keep making more. We need to keep coming through breakthroughs in order to solve the problems that we have. And faith and meaning are, what you help to imbue the science with, because obviously splitting atoms is not good or bad. It can be good and it can be bad. It depends on how it's used. And so science is a bit agnostic in that regard. But it's still foundational because we need to keep developing things in order to live happier, fuller lives. So college for me was a very expansive, and medicine became just an extension of that. And I'm endlessly fascinated with how things work and how bodies work. And one of the reasons I like putzing around here is because we get to learn about how the furnace works and all the sort of stuff that I don't know about. But it's interesting to see, because there's a lot of beauty in how things are created, even if they're created by people. And so anyway, that sort of medicine was an extension of my own interest in people and science.
So you actually kind of answered the next question about that intersection of medicine and spirituality. So what about... No? Okay.
Actually, I didn't,
right.
because I don't really understand the term spirituality, and that's really what I wanted you to help us with today. Because I understand meaning, I understand beauty, I understand when something feels really good. You learn about something, it says that's, that really feels consonant with who I am or what I believe. But the spirit part, and what exactly, I think that is a problem. And how is that different in your perspective from finding meaning / beauty and the kinds of things that people feel as feels right to them in terms of those kinds of things?
It's a good question, and there is a strong intersection there for me. So I think that's different for everybody, but I'll explain how it is for me. So I believe that meaning comes about in a number of different ways in our lives. Some of it is where we create the meaning ourselves, and where we, have that intersection of our own morality and about life. But spirituality, if you think of spirit and inspiration, there's an element of life that moves us, and we don't always know the source of that movement. And so spirituality for me, when I talk about spirituality, most times in this context here, I'm talking about the things that we do that enhance that inspiration or enhance that motivation, or that set the stage for meaningful work. So for instance, if I was to, and this may be kind of superficial for your work because I don't understand all the parts of it, but spirituality, if I was to say it was going to inform my work in a medical office, what I might be looking for is ways that I prepared myself to be in the most open and receptive and observant and listening way, so that the work that I did was the most meaningful and useful to the person. So that my spiritual practice, which would be part of my spirituality, might be something like meditation, or a quiet time, or listening to even music, or something that helps prepare me to be the most authentic human being that I can be. And I say that because I have a very high regard for what it means to be human, meaning that when we're the most human, we're the most authentic, we're the most capable of giving, the most inspired, most open to that voice that might have the most meaningful way of exposing the need and the solution. So spirituality and meaning are connected. They're sort of, you might think of them a bit as two sides of the same coin.
Sounds somewhat intentional then. When I go in to see a patient in a room, how stressed I am, how far behind the schedule I am, all that stuff affects how my interaction goes. And, they tell us, they say, knock on the door, count to 3, sort of, and prepare yourself. And a lot of my colleagues talk about taking a deep breath or the inspiration and trying to clear yourself, because, if you really want to help somebody, you first have to listen to them, right? You have to find out, because it's very interesting. You walk into the room and you will look at somebody and you would think, by the way they look, this must be their problem. Their joints are swollen, they look sick, whatever. And sometimes when you start to ask them a question, then they say, oh no, that's fine, or that's the way it always is, but this is my concern. This is where I'm coming from. And so the listening part.
And I think that it's just a movement that we hope occurs inside of us that is the most expansive kind of movement. And that's a good segue to what we're going to do after this interview. I'm going to lead us in a meditation. So we'll talk about that a little bit, breath a little bit more with that. So now, is that satisfactory?
Fair enough.
So what brought you to Ladera Community Church?
Well, actually my bicycle. I ride a lot around, and I think I was coming and riding on Sunday morning one time. Sue and I had been going to different churches around St. Denis Catholic Church, but I think I was riding my bike on the loop one Sunday morning, and I heard a lot of music. And music, as I mentioned, was foundational, and having these folks here playing, and is that a piccolo that we heard earlier? That was wonderful. I don't think I've ever heard a piccolo in church here before, but anyway. So coming here, and music is fascinating, because when you learn a song as a child, that sticks with you in a way that other things never do. It's sort of like smells, you smell something and it takes you back to your grandmother's house or whatever. But music is the same, and coming and listening to the hymns, and so that was important. And we had several children at the time, and more on the way at the time. So having a place where they would be welcomed, and they would get to see people of all walks of life, because when you're in Silicon Valley, it's very easy just to be around people like you. And so finding people who were doing different things, younger, older, and our family was embraced, and even despite what my sons would occasionally do around here, everybody was very forgiving. And Donna Ryan, bless her heart, was wonderful when they would, put new things on the computers. Oh, sorry. So anyway, but it was very welcoming, and it was great to have a place for kids to grow up. And the things that were planned for them during the summer with work projects, Sierra Service Project, those things were really helpful for them. And I think were important, because that's kind of what Sue and I really wanted the kids to be able to expose to.
That Sue was looking for rest, because when I was observing, when I got your email to send you an email about this Sunday and everything, I noticed the age of your children, and they're 2 years apart, every single one of them. So Sue was on quite a roll there. Things were probably pretty intense, and
the first Sunday he came, I was home with a newborn.
Oh, okay. Okay, so Sue was home with the newborn the first Sunday. Okay. So looking at Ladera Community Church then, looking at where we are now, and everything that you've done or said to me, I've always thought was very thoughtful about things. So tell me what you think about this church in the years ahead. What do you see? What do you hope for? What do you think is our challenge?
Well, and I like the thing that Pooh also said when he, in that little reflection, because not only did he talk about anticipation, but he also said he stopped to think. And I think a lot of times when we talk to each other, we just start blurting out what the first thing comes into our minds and don't stop to think. But Um, I think organized religion in America today is, on a fundamentally downward trajectory, and a lot of people are very distrustful of it. And so it's not the same type of a community place where people come to be together, and people are doing that in different ways that may be good or bad or otherwise, but it's really lost its luster, and some of that is for very good reasons because of some of the things that have happened in churches. And so if you look at the trajectory from the last 20 years, which is how long I've been here, I mean, the attendance has fallen, and we have been unable to do many of the things we used to do. I mean, we don't have enough kids to send to Sierra Service Project anymore. So you can see the trend, and if you draw the line another 5 or 10 years, well, it gets pretty skimpy if this is the trajectory. So we need to keep looking for ways to become relevant to the communities around us and to meet needs around us, and to look at our resources and how we can do that so we can create community. The goal of a church isn't necessarily to grow and grow and grow. It's to provide a spiritual place for people. But honestly, you need to have a critical number of folks to do that. And so we need to keep looking and cherish what we have, but not be satisfied there.
So this question was, part of some of the others that you mentioned in some small ways, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit more directly about the ways that you nourish yourself spiritually, the things that you do to, I'm asking you about your spirituality, even though.
Oh, I don't like that word?
Yeah.
Well, I was out on my bike this morning, and, living around here is just amazing. For all the problems that we have. I mean, you can get on your bike and get out into some amazing places. I've ridden my bike a lot of places, and this is really wonderful to see and to experience. And, one thing I think is important is to have an activity where you just let your mind be open and not do anything. That's why riding a bike is perfect, because it's dangerous to put things in your ears to get distracted, and so it sort of forces you to be open, and a lot of very interesting. And when you exercise as well, lots of new thoughts come into your mind. So, exercise and doing that, and just exposing myself to people. I mean, one of the wonderful things of being a doctor in Silicon Valley is that I have the most amazing people come across my clinic. I mean, I have Nobel laureates, and I have people, inventing the next new thing, these Silicon Valley engineers who are working 120 hours a week because they've got this new idea. And, I'm getting older now, and it's interesting. I'm finding that a lot of the young people, like Matthew and his cohort, and Charlie and Henry, I get a lot of inspiration from spending time around folks like that. And so I really like to do that, because although I think I might have something to give to them, I think actually they have a lot more to give to me, because the idea that you have this plasticity as a young person and you can develop into anything. I mean, if you raise a kid in, whatever country you name, they learn that language, they learn those customs, they learn all of that. And it just brings about the idea that there's so much potential and so much that we don't know, and all of that I find very inspiring. And so when you ask how I nourish myself, I just, I read great novels. I'm in a great book group, and I try to get around people who have interesting things to say. And although Sue thinks maybe I should retire someday, I mean, my work is just incredibly interesting and challenging, and trying to do it well, I think, is just, it just gets me out of bed every morning. And although I can see as I get older, a lot of the things that people I see in clinic start to experience as well. So, but, I don't think I haven't run out of energy yet. And that's, I think, all those things I find very, very nourishing and inspiring.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to one more question. So you read the parable of the talents differently. I think that you can read that parable a lot of different ways. But I think one of the most important ways to look at any of those parables is to find the doorway to God. So I guess my question back to you would be not to say that there's a certain perfect interpretation, but where for you is the doorway in that parable to God?
Well, the parables I have found remarkable as well, because they do reflect, as you look at them in different times of your life, you interpret them differently, and they mean different things to you. And that's one interesting thing about hearing messages about parables as time goes on. Like any good story, they keep changing for you as you age. In terms of your question, the meaning and the challenge, I think a message in the parable there is that, we're each differently imbued with talents and things to share. And the essence of developing those and the responsibility slash joy of doing that is foundational, I think, in people. And I have also begun to think of Jesus more as a remarkable person in the time that he lived, and truly inspired. And the message and the inspiration, I think, change situationally, but the core of it, the truth and the beauty of it, I still think is God. And even though the perception and personification becomes nebulous as I've aged in terms of exactly what that represents, the grandeur and the possibility is actually increased, because I think if you stop thinking of God and putting barriers on what that form may take or look like or communicate or whatever, then it actually opens up all sorts of new possibilities that are fascinating and interesting. I don't know if that answers your question.
The way I would repeat that back to you is, I think I would say that the doorway in is the doorway to possibility. Perhaps that there's the potential that exists in that moment. Each of those people with different abilities, different approaches, different contexts could bring themselves to be useful or to be inspired and to take care of the resources they've been given or the life that they've been given.
And the time that they were given them.
Right. Yeah. That's good. So I'm going to invite you to stay here with me while we do this next thing. And thank you very much for sharing. And it's good to know more about you, and it's good to make sure that everybody else gets a chance to hear from you as well. So thank you, Dave, for sharing. We're going to sing a song called The King of Glory. And it's about an entrance, sort of like coming into Jerusalem and everything. And as an act of spirituality, I'd like us to do a meditation together. And it's kind of tied to something that you said about breath, about life and everything. I'm going to give us a couple of things to think about. But I guess I'd like you to get started by just getting really comfortable where you are. Put your feet on the floor to just feel secure and feel grounded, and to just allow yourselves to sit in this moment. And we're going to work toward the very thing that you talked about that openness, about being open to the moment and getting ready to sing this song in a way where we feel like that presence of God or Christ will be entering us, even though we sing about him entering Jerusalem. And the part of the song that says, Emmanuel, remember is God is with us, is the meaning of Emmanuel. So this meditation, I'm going to, instead of talking about something that's very beginning level or anything like that with meditation, I'm going to assume that all of you are advanced meditators. You have the capacity, and there's a type of meditation that's called one breath meditation. And basically that meditation, the idea or the belief behind that meditation is that you can accomplish as much with one breath as you can by sitting in meditation for hours. Okay? Now, to have that one breath, I'm kind of a slow learner, so it takes me 4 or 5 to get there. Okay? So I'm going to take you on a journey that allows you 4 or 5 breaths. And that, don't try to just do 5 breaths the whole meditation. I'm going to you can breathe in between when I talk during the meditation, so don't like hold your breath. I don't want anybody to feel like this should be easy, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I invite you to close your eyes or to look out to the light or to the trees and just kind of settle in for a minute and notice your breathing. Our breathing is so important. If we think about our breathing and rest with it, contemplate the meaning of that breathing. In the beginning of Genesis, God moves upon the waters in spirit, but the word that's used also means breath, like the breath of life. The very first thing we do when we're born into this world is we take a breath. And the very last thing we do when we leave this world is we exhale. And in between, we take so many breaths. During this meditation, we're going to wake up to some things. And the first thing that I'd like us to wake up to is to wake up from the belief that our stories or our thoughts or our memories are the things that define us. We're going to let go of those things. And so as you take this first breath, and you can make it a nice deep breath, let it be a letting go of all of those things that you think about yourself. Just be here and just be now with this breath. We're opening ourselves to a very wide space, a very inclusive space without any expectations. The second thing that we're going to let go of is knowing that our stories are not who we are. We also are going to let go of any stories we have about anyone else, because just like our stories are not who we are, our stories about other people are not who they are. So with this breath, we'll let go of all those ways that we project out into the world and just let them pass away. Again, just opening ourselves with breath. With the third breath that we're going to take, we're going to awake out of a dream of separation, where we believe that everything and everyone is separate from us. We're going to awake to the kind of unity that exists in all of the universe. So let's take that breath and settle into that sense of oneness. With this next breath, we're going to awake to something very different. We're going to awake to the knowledge that without us to observe something, it simply doesn't exist. We live in a universe that only exists when we're there to observe it. So we're letting go of any kind of preconception of our existence. We'll feel that oneness again with this breath. And finally, we're going to awaken with one final breath, that our being rests inside the ground of all being, at the very foundation of all life and all existence. With this breath, we're going to allow ourselves, if we were like a ripple on water, we would gradually dissipate into the oneness of that existence in all being. And in this place, we are completely open. There's an emptiness that's a kind of fullness, so that anything that comes to us just kind of passes through and moves on, while we sit in anticipation in this moment. And let us take that one final breath now, with our awareness so present. We feel that openness and that grounded being here and now. Amen.